Welcome to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast, a podcast that brings personal stories from transplant survivors, their families, friends, and loved ones. This is where you will hear challenges and triumphs of everyone involved in this journey. Our guests will offer wisdom, advice, and inspiration on everything you want to know about transplant. My name is Jenny McFarland. I am a transplant survivor, and this is a podcast I wish I had before and immediately following my transplant. Thank you for listening. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast. This is Jenny McFarland, your host. And first, let me say Happy New Year. I'm excited for the new year. It's already almost the end of January, so the new year's already going by pretty quickly. But I'm excited for new things to come this year. And it's an even year, and I always have really good even years. So 2024 is going to be my year. This episode is a great episode with a lady from Canada. So we are going out of the country for this episode, which is fantastic. And it's a two-parter episode. This is going to be part one, and I'm going to stop it almost halfway and then just pick it up on the next episode. So stay tuned for part two, which should be coming out in a few days. And I don't want to go into too much detail. So let's go ahead and jump into this episode and help me welcome my guest, Nancy Lewis. Hi, Nancy. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me on.
You're welcome. So I want to ask you first where you had your transplant, when you had it, and why you needed one.
So I live in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So I had my transplant here in Toronto, and it's just over 18 months now. I had a double lung transplant.
Oh, that's fantastic. 18 months.
So yeah, so it's starting to feel like, well, they always say the first year is the hardest.
Yeah.
I got through that year, and it's starting to feel like really, I used to post, well, I still do. I post on Facebook every month when I have an anniversary, but now it's starting to be like, yeah, another month, like still going. Yeah, it's starting to get that feeling like
things are getting back to normal.
Well, I don't know what normal is because I've been sick for a very, very long time, but
Right.
I'm starting to feel like I'm surviving, and I'm not so worried anymore that things are going to suddenly get worse. So that's a wonderful feeling.
Yeah, I remember before my transplant, I knew my body. I knew what I needed to do. If I got sick, I would tell the doctors, hey, this is what I need. And then I had a transplant, and it took a really long time for me to feel like I knew my body again. Right. So I got these new lungs in there, and I had no idea what they were going to do. I didn't know my body anymore. It was really hard to deal with that because I was terrified when I left the hospital that I was going to do something wrong. And then it took months and months, maybe almost like 2 years before I started feeling confident that I knew exactly what I needed, or I could recognize my body again. So I know what you're talking about there.
So I was like, I can see you, although people listening can't see you, but I can see you, and you're fairly young. So I'll talk about my journey towards my transplant. Well, you're not as old as me. You're shaking your head, but I'm telling you, 63, almost 64. So I was diagnosed in 2007 with, after quite a long period and a lot of testing and things seemingly to me unrelated happening to my body. I was finally diagnosed in 2007 with scleroderma and rheumatoid arthritis, and associated with that, caused by that, presumably, interstitial lung disease. So these are chronic autoimmune conditions, except for the lung disease, that, no known cure, no known cause.
Yeah.
They just happen. And so it's pretty scary. And at that time, so 2007, there wasn't anything really to do about scleroderma, and there wasn't really anything to do about interstitial lung disease except maybe steroids. But
Yeah.
rheumatoid arthritis, at least there were medicines that could really help you. And I was in pretty bad shape by the time I got these diagnoses. So, and I was really scared because I was still quite young in my 40s, later 40s. And, I've always been healthy. And then suddenly I couldn't really walk. And I was having a little bit of trouble, not too much trouble breathing, but it was just like overwhelming. And I was really frightened of medications. So I didn't want to take any medications. And I tried the naturopathic route for a while and got worse and worse. And so finally started meds for the rheumatoid arthritis.
Yeah.
So, and you start, at least in Canada here, you start with the tried and true ones, and you take them for 3 months before you see an effect. So take one for 3 months, nothing. Take a different one for 3 months, nothing. And then I was approved to take one of the newer biologic medications, which was an injectable. And like my life kind of changed overnight. So no
Really?
more pain. It was
Wow.
amazing. To me, but this was a long time ago, but looking back, it was like within a week, I started to feel way better. So I'd been like, I remember one day walking like a little old lady, looking at myself, and I'm just like shuffling along, and I'd
Yeah.
lost a ton of weight. I was just so sick. So, and I couldn't sleep because I was in so much pain. So suddenly to have this pain gone, to be able to sleep well, to feel the fatigue gone, it was really an amazing thing.
Yeah.
So the lung disease sort of ticked along in the background, and I was seeing, we call them respirologists here, pulmonologist, you would say. Uh, and he said to me, well, so by this time they'd figured out it was pulmonary fibrosis, scarring caused by the either scleroderma or rheumatoid arthritis, or maybe both. Don't really know. But it was sort of ticking along, and he said, you're pretty stable. But if you start to decline, I'll have to refer you to the lung transplant program. And my mind just shut down. It was like
Yeah.
the most
Yeah.
frightening thing I could ever imagine in my life. And I just kind of closed my ears, don't want to hear about that, forget about that. And then, you know, seems so funny now, but I just thought if it ever comes to that, I'll refuse. Like, that's just crazy. I can't even imagine such a thing.
Yeah.
So I went on, and the medications for rheumatoid arthritis worked very well for me. And eventually, 5, 6 years, I went into remission. So I haven't had to take any medications for that ever since. So then it was scleroderma and pulmonary fibrosis. So, I kind of noticed that it did sort of my lung function did sort of slowly decline, but it was manageable. And, now I realize that I just sidestepped it. Wow, it's getting hard to climb stairs. I'll just take the escalator, doing all these little things
Was that
so that I,
because of like it was harder to breathe or you were
yes,
having pain again? Okay.
no, no, no pain.
Yeah.
I've been very lucky since those early days of chronic pain. I really haven't dealt with too much pain, but it
Yeah.
was just getting shorter of breath. And then you just compensate. I compensated, take the elevator, take the escalator.
Yeah.
And I knew I used to work in an office downtown, and I take the subway, and I knew where to get on the subway. So when I got out, the elevator was right there. So I didn't
Yeah.
have to walk all the way. Like, just compensating with and not really admitting to myself that things were getting worse.
Yeah.
And so that went on for quite a long time. And move ahead to like 2019. So already at that point, I'd lived for like 12 years with these diseases. And my respirologist started saying to me, you need to go on oxygen. You should think about going on oxygen. And every time he said it, I would say, nope, nope, nope. Because
Yeah.
in my mind, that was the first step on the road to lung transplant, the most terrifying thing that I could ever imagine,
Yeah.
which is really dumb. Like, it's not like the oxygen puts you on the route, it's your lungs that put you on the route.
Right.
So
No, I know what
silly.
you're saying because when I when I was first talking about lung transplant, I would always say I'm not doing that. There's no way.
Yeah, no way.
And it took me a long time to start wearing oxygen also. Not for the same reason as you, but just that I felt like I could just manage without it. Like I was like, I don't
Yeah.
need it. I'll just slow down a little bit. I don't need the oxygen until I finally just broke down and gave in and it helped me tremendously in less than
I
two to
know,
3 weeks.
so dumb, eh? It's like,
Yeah,
so you were compensating in a different way, but you're
yeah,
compensating and not really facing it. And so finally, and we started doing, my husband and I started doing quite a bit of traveling because, it was obvious that I was sick and who knows what's going to happen. So we, and it started getting harder and harder for me to walk around so much. And just normally we would go and stay out all day and walk all day. And, we'd be going for hours. And then it started to get worse. And the last trip I took was in February 2020. That was my 40th birthday. And we went to Honolulu. Um, and there were days when I really couldn't walk well at all. Some days were okay, but some days were bad. And I just really couldn't make it a couple of blocks and I have to rest a lot. And it was not great. And when I got back from that trip, by coincidence, I had already had an appointment booked with my respirologist like the next week. And I went in and he just said, that's it. You're going on oxygen. Like, you cannot
yeah,
push me off anymore. And of course, I felt way better on oxygen.
yeah,
It's just so dumb. Eh? It's like, duh. Yeah, actually, it really helps.
yeah,
Um, but I was still not doing very well. And so he said, you're going to go on oxygen. And the respiratory therapist came with the equipment the next day and he's going to set me up. And he took my heart rate. He said, wow, it's really high. You should see your doctor. Of course, I didn't want to go see my doctor.
yeah,
Uh, it's like, I just took oxygen. I don't want to go. So I tried to put it off. I was still pretty mobile in those days. And eventually, and I went to the like weekend clinic that's part of her practice. And they said, you need to go to the hospital. You need to go to emergency right now. And I said, no, wouldn't go. Um, and they're like, we can't test you. We can't figure it out. I'm like, can't you do anything? Take an x-ray. I don't know. So, and I refused to go. And I reached out to my respirologist. I emailed him and he said, you're probably okay. And my family doctor read the notes and she started calling me. You need to go to emergency right now. And I was like, well, the respirologist said it was okay. So she called my respirologist and talked to him. Anyway, long story short, eventually I went in and I was admitted into the hospital and found to have blood clots on my lungs, which was what she was afraid of. She's
yeah,
like, it could kill you. You need to get in there. I'm like, I'm fine. So I was diagnosed with pulmonary embolisms and put on blood thinners, and they dissolved pretty quickly, but I didn't get better. I didn't get better at all. Actually, I was really kind of, and I went in to see the whatever those guys are called that deal with clots. And he said, I can't help you anymore. You need to be seen at the pulmonary hypertension clinic. So I didn't know what pulmonary hypertension was, and I didn't know any of the warning signs of it. And so, and it's not easy to get into because there's only one here in Toronto. It's all centralized in one place. So eventually I got in and I went in for my first, consultation with the doctor. And he said, you're really sick. I want to admit you to the hospital right now, right on my first appointment. So I was like, what? Uh, well, but anyway, I finally learned my lesson that when the doctors say you need to go to the hospital, you
Yeah.
need to go to the hospital.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, well, how long will I be in here? A couple of days? And he said 2 weeks. So I was like flabbergasted.
Yeah.
And I went in for 2 weeks and I was put on heavy duty diuretics and lost 20 pounds in 2 weeks, all
Wow.
fluid off my
Yeah.
body. And by this time, I was really very frail and I never went back to work after I went on oxygen. I started on sick leave and then disability. And I was just like very, very frail and very, very weak. So and of course, I'm lying in that hospital bed and I sort of say to one of the doctors one day, can I exercise? Should I be exercising? And he goes, oh, yeah, that would be great. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, tell me that.
Yeah.
Uh, so I started, walking around a bit with my husband. And at first, I could just not really go anywhere, but we sort of worked up to it and I was able to walk around a bit. So for pulmonary hypertension, that's what really threw me over the edge, and really made my condition very dire. So they started me on 2 medications in the hospital, and I took those and went back very soon after I got discharged, and it didn't really help much, a little, but not enough. So what they're measuring at that point was my heart, like my heart was severely enlarged. I had severe right-sided heart failure. When
Yeah.
I first went in, I had left and right-sided heart failure, but with the medications, the left went down and it was fine, but the right did not regain its function. So that was what was really very debilitating for me. So they
Let
put me
me
on a,
let
yep,
me just ask you real quick if
yeah.
while you're going through all of this right now at that time, had you reconsidered lung transplant yet, or were you still, I'm not getting a
No,
transplant? Yeah.
no, I just thought, I didn't really understand what was going on or how serious it was.
Yeah.
It's like you adjust to your life and you kind of get used to it and you think, well, this is where I am. And so no one had really spoken to me about lung transplant during that whole period. And the hope really was that the medications would make me better because they do for some people
Yeah.
that can, you can control your pulmonary hypertension with medications and you don't need to go any further than that. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case for me.
Yeah.
So they put me on another medication and that didn't work. And so the next time I saw my pulmonologist, that pulmonary hypertension specialist, he said, and this was only like, I don't know, 4 or 5 months after I'd first started seeing him, he said, I want to refer you to the transplant program. It's like the words that I never wanted to hear.
Yeah.
He said them. So I'm like, oh my God. So, the first step is just to refer me, and that takes time. So it's like, okay, put in a referral. And I came home and I cried. I've been pretty stoic through all this. And, it's like, okay, it's kind of shitty, but whatever.
Yeah.
Uh, but this time I really cried. It's like, this is the thing that I was the most afraid of. And I never wanted it to come to this. And now here I am. And, there's really nothing to say. Like my husband is like, it'll be okay. Of course, he doesn't know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, so I got that out of my system. And then I'm like, okay, when I get the referral, I'll go. And within a month, I received a referral to go to the lung transplant doctor, one of the lung transplant respirologists, and discuss the process, just to let me know, like, what's the process, what's going to happen, you
Yeah.
know. So I went with my husband. We went and met him, and he talked like for an hour. He was pretty amazing. He just had his spiel, and he went through his spiel and answered all my questions. Although by the end, I had almost no questions because he was so thorough.
Yeah.
And it was clear then that This is just an assessment to see if I'm even eligible. I may not be eligible. So don't, this is like a long journey, one step at a time.
Right.
So don't, kind of, and I guess that was a real lesson, right? This is not an all or nothing. This is not a decide right now. Like you may not even be eligible. So who the hell knows?
Right.
And, Toronto in particular is a really top program. It's one of they do the most transplants of any program in the world. And they did the first successful lung transplant in the world. Like they have a lot of experience with this, and the stats are really good. Like,
Yeah.
like 92% of people survive the first year. And, so like it's not nearly as dangerous and scary as I thought it was. I mean, it's huge, of course, and it is scary, but
Yeah.
my mother had died of cancer when I was quite young, which is why I was so scared of medication and so scared of surgery and
Yeah.
drastic interventions. But like my chances with this were better than her chances with metastatic breast cancer. So it's like, okay, well, let's try, because I always said, because my mother died when I was 20, I had always kind of had it in my mind that I was going to die young. And sort of thought to myself, I'm not going to do drastic things. I'm just going to live with it. If I die, that's okay. Accept, accept it.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, I don't want to die.
Yeah.
I want to live.
Right.
So I agreed to undergo the assessment process. So that was in January 2020. And in March, COVID hit. So what used to be, oh, well, so the transplant program completely shut down for a couple of months there.
Yeah.
So nothing was really going on in the hospitals that was not related to COVID. So I had to wait much longer than people used to before COVID to start the assessment. And then when my assessment started, it was more like one appointment one day and then 2 weeks later, another appointment. So the whole thing stretched out for quite a long time.
Yeah.
So I was there at a very weird time. But eventually, in October, I was found to be eligible. So all during that time, I think I used my time pretty wisely in really finding out as much as I could from people like us who survived.
Yeah.
Um, what is this process? What's it like? What do I need to be prepared for? What do I need to think about? So that I was and I continued this on all through educating myself about this process. So I was kind of ready.
So
So
finding people to talk to that have been through it before kind of helped you change your mind or make you feel more comfortable going through the process.
100%. And it wasn't individual people, actually. It was more like Facebook groups is where I sort of started.
Yeah. Yeah.
People who had my diseases with scleroderma, with pulmonary fibrosis. And then I started joining these transplant groups and, hearing from people. I mean, these are mostly young people who've had cystic fibrosis, but, people live decades. Like
Yeah.
it's amazing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was a lot older, so I wasn't, I knew that. So when they called me to say, you are eligible, do you want to be listed? I said yes.
Yeah.
Scary, exciting. Oh my God. And
Yeah.
then I waited for a very long time without any calls at all. So that was, I mean, like I used to every month, I would talk to one of the doctors from the transplant program. In those days, because of COVID, we were doing mostly calls. So
Yeah.
I would have a phone call once a month. So, like, I know intellectually that I am on the list, but I waited 18 months before I even got my first call. So, in the back of your mind, you're kind of thinking, am I even on this list? Is
Yeah.
this ever going to happen? Um,
Did it take so
so
long because of COVID or? I don't know what the criteria is out there in Canada, but like, did you have a rare blood type or were you just not sick enough yet? Do you know why it took so long?
Mostly it was because of COVID. So we get, a lot of our organs obviously come from people who've had accidents.
Yeah.
We were in shutdown. People weren't really out, people weren't doing things. And we also get a lot of lungs and organs from the States,
Yeah.
from places that might not be able to use them. And that pipeline was cut off.
Mm.
Like nothing was coming up from the States.
Yeah.
I am small, so that makes it take a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And I never get my blood types right, but I not a hugely rare blood type, but um that was a bit of an issue. But mostly I think it was a supply issue, that there
Yeah.
just weren't a lot of lungs coming through.
Oh, yeah.
And so the ones that there were going to people who were probably in hospital. And I was able to stay home the whole time. Like,
Yeah.
I was home until I had my transplant, luckily. I mean, I was definitely very weak and very frail and doing little by the end.
Yeah.
But it was just bad timing in a way, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, so, I had heard people say, like, you need to be as strong as you can be to have a transplant.
Yeah.
So that was really what I focused on, was exercising as much as I was able, because by this time I was really doing almost nothing. So I started like walking on the spot in my house 4 minutes a day. And my goal was to add a minute every day. And it was really hard. It was
Yeah.
really hard. And it took me months to work up to half an hour. And I would often have to stop, like split it up into two or three,
Yeah.
segments. But I did it, and I started adding some light weights, and I was so fatigued and so frail, and I just couldn't. That was where all my energy went in the day. I used to, work and do housework, and I've always really loved cooking, and I would do cleaning, and by the end it was that exercise was all I could do. I could not do anything else at all in my day.
Yeah.
Ugh. And so I worked on my exercise. I worked on eating as well as I could. And in those days, and in this way, COVID was a bit of a blessing, because food delivery had suddenly exploded and all kinds of great stuff was suddenly available,
Yeah.
because I couldn't go out. And, not just COVID, but my strength and
Yeah.
everything, it was just too much. So I could get food delivered to my house, that I could reheat or whatever, and good food, healthy food.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is attitude. What's in my control? My exercise, my diet, my attitude.
Yeah.
So, I would sit in my little house and I would look out the window at the birds or the flowers, or just feel the sun. Or maybe if I was feeling really energetic, I'd walk. If the weather was perfect, I would walk around the block, stopping several times, but just to like look for a little bit of joy in every day in my life, just to feel happy that I'm still here.
Yeah.
Like, that was all I could control. I can't control when there's going to be lungs. I can't control when I'm going to get the transplant. I can't really control my disease. All I can control is my diet, my exercise, and my attitude. So that was where everything went to. So finally, after 18 months, I got a call. I am really on the list. And I got a call, and my husband
Yeah.
and I were just like in a complete flap,
Yeah.
because, like, oh my God, I thought it would never come.
Yeah.
So we got a call, and she said, come in the morning. I think she said tomorrow. And then I got another call later on saying, oh, not tomorrow, try maybe in the evening. And then I got another call saying, come in the next day in the morning. So I don't really know what was going on, and they don't tell us what's going on, like why.
Yeah,
Uh,
that seems kind of weird, right? Like, what if
yeah,
they like, well, do you have the lungs or not? Like,
yeah,
what's going
is
on?
it's
Yeah.
what's going on? I don't know. So finally, the sort of I got the call on Friday midday, and on Sunday morning I went in, and they do your blood test and all that stuff they do. And then I just lay there basically for 14 hours.
Yeah.
And you can't eat, you can't drink. They had me tethered to wall oxygen, so I couldn't even move around much.
Yeah.
I had to ask them to get a tank to go to the bathroom, but they didn't want me walking around or anything, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I've been walking 30 minutes every day, so it just drove me bananas to lie there,
Yeah.
not knowing what was going on. And they even came and initialed, you know, the surgeon or the doctor came and initialed me to show two lungs and everything. And then after 14 hours, they said, no, the lungs aren't viable and you can go.
Oh
So, of
no.
course, like it was hugely disappointing, but it's like, oh my God, could I have something to eat and drink now?
Yeah.
And they brought it to me, yogurt and juice. And I'm just like, I just want to get out of here.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not great at waiting at the best of times in medical situations. And this was just drove me crazy.
Yeah.
We came home, had some pizza, and sort of like, okay. Ugh. And then the calls started coming. So I had two more calls that were both aborted. One just as I was about to be admitted, and one, I think, as we were on our way to the hospital. And then finally, at 22 months, I got the call and I went into the hospital in the evening and they said, we have lungs and we think, the surgeon needs to check them. But they got me all settled into bed and I thought, oh, I'm never going to sleep. And the next thing I know, they're waking me up and it's like 6:15 in the morning. And they had told me before it was going to be 8. And she said, the nurse was like, wake up. They're ready for you right now. They're early. They're never early.
Yeah.
So it seems like it's really going to happen. So I
Were
called
you
my
af-
husband.
were you
Oh my God.
afraid? Were you afraid that it wasn't going to happen again?
Well, I don't actually remember anything beyond really calling my husband and saying, they're early. I'm going in now. They're never early. I got to go. And giving the nurse all my stuff. And I don't even remember being wheeled down the hall or the anesthesia or anything.
Yeah.
Um, that's all gone from my mind. So I don't know. I mean, I've heard of people getting all the way in there
Yeah.
on the table and then them going, nope. So I guess because they had said, we want her in here right now, the lungs were good.
Yeah. Stay tuned for part 2. Thank you for listening to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook. Oh, and if you have not signed up to be an organ donor, please visit www.organdonor.gov and register today. You too can save lives.